A very good morning, everybody, on our webinar on the performance management, a new look on performance management. I am Christophe, I'm your host today, and today I bring with me Jan Lorijsse from Worx, just as I am. Maybe Jan, if you would be so nice to present yourself to our audience.
Yes, Jan Lorijsse, I'm the HR evangelist for Worx, which means that it's my job to do public speaking on behalf of the organization in all the countries where we are present, and specifically on the future of work and HR. So I'm very happy here today to also talk about performance management, which is a huge chunk, an important part of HR. Next to that, I'm a researcher at the Antwerp Management School, University of Antwerp, and also doing some consultancy work for clients whenever I can fill in there.
All right, that's a mouthful.
Yes.
And today we're going to talk about performance management, maybe a few practical stuff for all our participants. On the right side, normally you have the chat. So there, feel free to pop all your questions. You don't need to wait until the end. If it pops up, feel free to put it there, and then we can certainly discuss it throughout the next 30 minutes. And then for the rest, we will basically go through the 5 steps that we see that are necessary to create a performance strategy, because a lot of organizations today, they are struggling with implementing a new performance management approach. And we noticed that there are a few steps that are necessary to take, and today we want to guide you through those 5 different steps. We also created an ebook of this, which will be sent to you at the end of our session, so don't worry. But today we're going to go through those 5 steps. The first one is redefine your performance management. In a lot of organizations, it's not working, so how can we redefine it? The second one is defining the stakeholders. Who do you need to get with you before you even implement it? Who should be involved and how should they be involved? The thirdly is presenting the business case to the management team, making sure they are on board, but they also realize the importance of it. Fourth is talking to suppliers, because today we can't do performance management anymore in Excel. We should do it with the tools that there are, and there are a lot of them. So how do you talk to suppliers? How do you focus on the right things? And this, the last one, and one of the most important ones, is enrolling it in your organization, making sure everybody is on board and how to cope with it. But let's start with the beginning and maybe ask you, Jan, performance management, what's so wrong about it today? Why should we change?
Well, I think we should change, but whether it's wrong is a different question. I think it needs to evolve, and that's the most important thing. That's also the subject of this webinar. I think there are 3 things that we should consider. First of all, performance management is a very important process within the HR department, which is often organized around the business year, which means that at the beginning of the year, we set goals, we set objectives, and at the end of the year, we make an evaluation, and the mid-year, we do a mid-year review. I think that is not matching anymore with business reality. I think we all know that a lot of things are changing, making a difference on the workplace. One of them, which I talk about often, is artificial intelligence and how it's changing the world of work. Also, how work is organized. People are involved in multiple projects often. That's very varied. So the whole idea is it still apt to actually meet the challenges of this era? Also means that are some of the objectives that we set, maybe we've reached them already half year. Maybe the objective has become obsolete because we have changed something. So I think timeliness is very important. So we need to be able to adapt to the pace and of the business, and to talk about the things that are relevant at that time. So that's one of the things, change, and how we can make that adaptive, that performance process more adaptive. Secondly, we often have seen that there is a distinction between the evaluation process and the career process or the development process. I think these need to be more and more intertwined, so that at a certain point in time, we can not only talk about what have we been doing lately and what have you been doing, what have you been appreciating, but also what do you like to do, where do you want to go, that we all bring that together. And that also brings together individual needs together with organizational needs. So that's where HR and performance pop up to actually meet, to match those 2 needs, and to see how we move forward. So career and development, a very important thing. Last but not least, I think that's also something what you meant when you said what's wrong with it. Where do we gather the data or the evidence to evaluate that performance, or to have a look at the performance? I think we come from a time where the manager and the worker sat down and the manager had all the information to talk about. At this point in time, I think the manager, if there's not a process in place to actually gather all those feedbacks, there's the word, those data, those feedbacks from people involved in your work, the people that you're working with on a daily basis or that you guide through a project and so on, if those data are missing, what in the end are we evaluating? How on earth are we going to evaluate performance? So gathering those data, that evidence from different sources becomes a really important part. So changing environment of the business, career is an important thing, and definitely where do we get the data or the evidence to actually support the performance management process.
So basically it means that we need to have more flexible objectives that evolve throughout the year, that also focus on the development of the employee and not solely on the performance.
Well, on both, I think performance is basically what we said between what's the contribution that an individual makes to the organizational objectives and how does the organization support the individual to actually meet those objectives. I think those objectives may change. Some objectives we set in time, and time may change. They may be more important. They have the time scales or the deadlines become shorter. Some get prolonged. So timeliness is really important. Like I said before, some just change. The nature or the importance of the goals, of the objective changes. Some just become obsolete. Okay, we decided to take another angle at this, or the organization has decided to move in another direction. This has become less important. Let's skip that and let's instead do something else and introduce a new objective.
Yeah. All right. And you already mentioned a few of the stakeholders that are involved in this whole process. You mentioned the employee, the manager, HR. Those are the three main ones. Am I forgetting one according to you?
Clients.
Clients, okay. And in what sense?
Well, if people have, for instance, are involved in projects or in pilot projects where there's also involvement from clients, customers that we are working in, it might be worthwhile to check with them as well. In my case, for instance, if I do public speaking, I think it's worthwhile to invite the audience also to give their idea on what my performance was.
Yeah.
For instance, that also goes for people in payroll, that also goes for people in IT. If you're working on projects in collaboration with people at the customer side, it makes sense to also check with them. How did I do? How did we do in this case? So that's definitely also an important stakeholder that we can think about.
So it's a 360 view basically on the performance of an employee. Once we implement a new, or we want to implement a new performance process, how should we involve those stakeholders in the process? Should we involve them at the beginning, in the middle, at the end? Do you think there is an ideal moment for that?
Well, I think it's very important that depending on the culture that your organization is fostering, you need to think about what's the best way to do this. Maybe there's already something that you are doing in that sense that makes it very easy, or that it makes very easy for people to understand what you're trying to change or what you're trying to plan for. If there's already a process in place, it might be just a case of informing the people how the conversation is going to change, or how the gathering of evidence before that conversation is taking place is going to happen. So that's very important. If you're really going to change the nature of performance management and the way that you approach that as an organization, then definitely a communication plan and a campaign is necessary to announce this and to make sure that everybody understands that it's also cascaded, like HR, senior management has a plan. This has been transferred, this is communicated to the middle management, and in the end also there's a communication plan towards everybody in the organization to perfectly understand what the objective is of this change and how that is going to take place over time. So that everybody knows what is expected on the one hand, and two, not also very important, what's in it for them.
And can you think about a few things? If you look at the principles we just mentioned at the beginning, it all sounds very logical for everyone, that it makes sense. Still, we see a lot of organizations struggling with implementing those principles. Is it then because what's in it for me is not clear? And what would be in it for a manager, for example, to work in this new way versus what he has now?
I think that a lot of organizations are already moving towards this. One of the things that is really making a difference now is that this is going to go for transparency. We're going to go for transparency. We're going to gather data from different sources, from different stakeholders, and we're going to bring those together. So this creates a new platform to talk about how are you doing, how are we doing. So transparency becomes a very clear change in this process. maybe that is not really fitting with your culture. This is something new also when we talk about performance, that we are clear about the fact that we need to gather those data. This may result in people, individuals, but also managers to be resistant. Now, resistance is not a bad thing. Resistance means that people care. That is good, but we need to explain why transparency is important so that we can actually get this done and over with, and that there's no hidden agenda about this transparency. And that often takes time.
Okay. So we have our principals.
Yes.
We have our stakeholders. They know what's in it for them. The next step should be, let's create a business case so that it's obvious, like, why we should be implementing that. Still, we see a lot of organizations are struggling mainly with that part, like how to create a business case, how to put some numbers on people. Do you have any recommendation on that part on how to best approach it?
Yeah, so the business case, any business case for the people department is often a tough case. But I do think there are important things to look at, and there are definitely KPIs that we can look at, goals, KPIs that can actually help you make you do this. If we can look at contribution of people, individual, but also team performances, that we get that clear cut, how that works and how departments and individuals are contributing to the goals, that's definitely one where we can see that's one thing that we can create. So basically, transparency on the contribution part is one of the things, one of the KPIs that we can actually look at and measure to do that. Secondly, there are definitely a number of things. We talked about development, we talked about career. There are a number of KPIs that are very relevant to see. This process should also contribute to some sort of sustainable, more sustainable HR. We all know that it's very hard to find the right people. We all want to keep those people. Like I often say, there are three things that HR should care about: finding people, keeping people, making sure that they don't get sick. These are KPIs. It means that you're looking at internal mobility. You look at whether people want to stay, whether they swap jobs internally. So you can look at the ins and the outs. You can look at internal mobility. You can look at absenteeism. These are all KPIs that actually can contribute and fund or support your business case to see that the investment in doing this actually looks at retention of people and actually looks also at sustainable HR and sustainable career development within your own organization.
Yeah, the KPIs that you mentioned now, they're rather longer term in that sense that retention, it will not suddenly change from one month to the other, or it's very dangerous to consider those two numbers. Are there things in the short run that you can keep track on to see that you're on the right track with your new process?
Well, of course, I think first of all, consider the data, so the analytics. What do we learn if we have a system in place to actually track this? There are a lot of data to look at. How are people doing? Whether the contribution is okay, whether they are overperforming, underperforming, and so on. So if you have the data, and that's of course also a very important investment that needs to be done. If you have the data, you can look at the short term. You can look at the beginning of the year, half year, and so on. So those are really important things. Of course, you can also connect with, if you're doing surveying, if you're looking at people engagement, and so on. Those can be connected as well. So we can look at that as well and integrate those kind of data. That's the whole thing, and I'm ahead of you there, but yeah, tooling is important to actually, otherwise, if you don't have the data, you can't do the evaluation.
Yeah, when we're talking about tooling, there is an enormous amount of tools on the market today, all of them proclaiming to be the solution for their organization. What are some criteria you need to keep in mind while deciding for the right tool?
Yeah. I got this sentence that says, if X is the solution, what is the problem? So if a tool is the solution, what's the problem again? And the fundamental problem that you want to think about is what you just also introduced. What are the principles of your performance management? If you just want to grade people at the end of the year, give them a number and put that in the system, then have a system, look at a system that does that. If you really want to change your performance culture and you want to actually collect feedback from different sources, you want to bring those together and you want to add information that make a difference, then that should be your KPI, or that should be the criteria to look at those tools. So it all depends on what is it that you want to achieve. But if you want to change it, definitely look at systems that are able to gather information from different sources to bring together an understanding of how people are contributing to the organizational goals. Those two are really critical. how do people contribute, and where do we get the evidence to support that that claim?
Yeah, and that's often something we see when we talk to organizations. The two non-negotiables are indeed it should be integrated with everything else what we do for our employees. Is it an HR system in the bigger picture? Also, the data, can we integrate this data to have the full picture of it? And the second non-negotiable is always the user experience. It should be obvious for our employees which steps they need to take to have a look at their objectives, to add an objective. And this is something we see in certain tools. It's sometimes a bit difficult to cope with it. And we also notice, and I don't know if you have a similar experience, that the attitude towards clunky user experience is going drastically down, and people can't tolerate it anymore.
No, I think the latter statement is absolutely true. It needs to be so clear-cut and easy to use that anyone can use it, and that is also not only that they can use it, that it's easy to use. So it means that basically it works, it's easy to use, but also it's inviting to use. If it invites the employee, but also the manager to work with it, if it invites to collect feedback, if it invites to talk about yourself, to think about this and actually collect those information, those are the most important things. And basically that means employee experience is how we deal with people. The tools need to work and they need to be inviting enough to use. The other thing is the integration, the non-negotiable. Definitely, I think there we have made a lot of progress also technologically, that it's easier and easier to connect systems one-on-one and that we can integrate the data. That makes, of course, a lot of a difference. And that's also something that you also should consider, whatever solution that you go for, that it basically is integrated and it talks with the other tools that you have in place.
When we're talking about tools, about technology, then there are two letters that always pop up: AI. How should AI support performance management?
Yeah, AI has a lot of faces, and I think that where it can help us in HR in general, performance management, talent management in particular, is that I think AI can help us to nudge people. AI typically looks at patterns in data and how people behave, on how careers evolve, on how people perform on data. So it helps us basically to understand better who you are, what you do, what you like, and also be able to compare with people that are of the same age, the same gender, the same stage in their career, whatever. And these data and the use of those data by artificial intelligence can help us maybe to nudge, for instance, Christophe, to say, Christophe, your performance review is ahead. Have you thought about some career changes? How are you doing? Because people that are like you in the same age or the same stage in their career are likely to do this or to consider a job swap, and so would that be something for you? So I think there the artificial intelligence goes hand in hand with the human intelligence to support the conversation about what is it that you're doing. Are you liking what you do? Are you doing a good job? And where do you want to go? Like we said in the beginning, performance, development, and career. There, artificial intelligence can definitely start helping us to nudge people to think about that, but also to inform HR and the manager, the first line of HR, to have a think about, you're going to have a talk with Christophe. Christophe has been doing this for a long time. Look at his performance, been quite well. Shouldn't you start a conversation about doing something else, involve him in a project, another project or so, at least consider it. So there, I think, definitely artificial intelligence, again, goes hand in hand with human intelligence to have a better conversation about your performance, about your contribution, and where you're heading with your career.
Yeah. So really to make it part of the bigger picture. Go from the performance of the employee to the career of the employee.
Yes.
And then we're very close to retention, basically, is how can we keep our talents and evolve them towards our next step.
Yes, because there as well, and you know this as well, there's a lot of changes. We're talking about future skills, where people, what the skills of the future that people should acquire and so on, so on. That's the organizational perspective on this. So, okay, what is the skills that we're going to need in the future? And at the same time, how are you doing at the moment? What are you doing? What about your skill set? Do you want to evolve that skill set? You want to go somewhere? And that is where the matching of those organizational and individual needs, artificial intelligence can actually help us out in making those matches or think about those matches and nudge people to actually reflect on that and have that conversation amongst each other.
All right. We talked about the 4 first steps already: creating the principles for your performance management, involving your stakeholders, creating your business case, choosing the supplier. So the next step is just rolling it out for the organization. Is it as easy as just telling people, we have a new tool, feel free to use it, and it will happen? Or are there other things to consider in this part?
Well, there are a few things in what you said. I don't think it's feel free to use it. In case of the performance management process, I think we should actually make people make it mandatory to use the tool. Mandatory also means that it needs, like I said, it needs to be inviting enough to use it. It needs to be easy to use, and it needs to make sense why we are using it. So, and getting this done in the organizations is not just the implementation of a system, right? The objective is that everybody uses it in the right way. And usually there's a gap. We think about implementing the tool, and of course it is really, really important that it all works. But the end game is that everybody uses it. Like we said, a communication plan, a change plan there, whatever it is, depending on your organization, you need to cascade this. The importance need to be evaluated and actually also supported by your senior management. This needs to be communicated to your middle management, how they would use it, why it's important, how they should deal with it, and then to the entire organization before you actually use it. If we start inviting this, then we may involve also the HR department to do some introductory sessions online, face-to-face, to actually make people aware also of how this works. But you can be sure that not everybody has the same proficiency in using these tools. So we might need some introduction, we might actually need some guidelines, some manuals, and so on to make people comfortable to use it. Those are the different steps that we need. You need to cascade it in communication, and we need to support the change to do this. So that also requires you to think about timeliness. What is the right time to do this? When should we start introducing this? In the beginning, it depends on where your business year starts, but let's say that business is January to December. That would mean that the year before, if you want to start in January with this process, at least 4 to 6 months in advance, you need to start to communicate, and you need to be aware what the kind of tools are that you're going to use, and so on, so that you can get people to think about this, and that they can actually also have the time to adjust and consume the idea that something is about to change. Then you introduce the tool, and then it's supporting them, setting up also maybe a mailbox or whatever chatbots to support people whenever they have questions to use these kind of tooling. So it's more about change, I think, human change, than it is about the implementation of a tool.
Yeah, and it's something that we indeed see in the projects that are the most successful. It's the tool will support the process instead of the other way around.
Yes.
Where your change management is trying to defend why to use this process in the tool. No, it should be these are our principles, and this tool will support us in getting there. And that's really when you see then they click nicely together. Those were our 5 phases. What we see in a lot of organizations, and you mentioned it at the beginning as one of the principles, is the big word of feedback.
Yes.
We see there are a lot of HR professionals who would love to have more feedback in their organizations. There are not so many organizations where feedback is really given. Do you see there, is there a way to get to more feedback, or is it just like something that certain people will do and other people will not? Are there ways to initiate this behavior within organizations?
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of organizations struggle with is not only to give people, but to give feedback, the right feedback at the right time to the right person. That's usually the challenge. To actually facilitate the process, it's really easy to get that done, is to ask it. Instead of waiting for someone to spontaneously give you the feedback, just ask them. And it's not about trying to get compliments and kudos and whatever. It's basically an honest question that you can ask, like, we've been working together on this project for 6 months. I would love your input on how we collaborate, on what I've been doing, what my contribution was, because I'm preparing for my performance review with my boss, with my manager, and I would like to have some input because that's the most relevant input that I can get. That's from the people that I work with. And this is as easy as it sounds and so difficult to do. So this is basically the big change that you need to get through in your organization. There is nothing wrong with asking feedback. And please, if people ask for feedback, make an effort, take your time and do that. The right feedback for the right person the right time, about the right thing, so that they can actually also use it. So it's not only about compliments, it's basically helping people to have a better performance review, move on with their career. This is something that you can also facilitate by tooling, probably, because like I said in the beginning, the third thing that I mentioned, which is changing, we need the evidence stored somewhere. And their tooling is definitely going to help us. But it requires that we make people comfortable with the idea that they, written or orally, whatever, with videos and so on, actually give feedback when at least they should give it when they're asked for.
Yeah.
And that is something that we need to make happen in the organization. Because, as I often have said, also to you, there is a lot of feedback flying around in an organization. It's a matter of getting it, of capturing it.
Yeah.
So if you asked for it, that's definitely an incentive to capture that and to motivate people to actually take their time and do the right thing.
And one of the struggles that we see too is that there is a difficulty to get from the levels of kudos, like well done, Jan, to real constructive feedback. Do you see there certain things people can do to facilitate that, to really go to that level?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the road, when I have my performance review and I only have all these amazing feedbacks with no constructive one there, sometimes it can also be a difficult conversation for that manager.
True. So there are some rules about giving feedback, and those you can also introduce. It's not so difficult to do, and you actually give people a little idea or some principles about giving feedback. Giving feedback is also like, it's not about, like you said, compliments or like, no. It's saying, Christophe, we work together on this project, so you have to be concrete. When I see you do this, or I see you do that, that makes me feel, or I see that happens, and so on. So it's about describing, excuse me, what is it that we did? How does that make me feel, or how does that contribute in any way to what we do? So hence, therefore, I want to thank you for that, or I want to give you some, you could have done a better job if you would have done this. So it's very much a very concrete thing. It's about actions that you saw, that you've observed, what they caused, positive, negative things, how they made you feel, how they made the client feel, and so on. And then an appreciation about that, and maybe even some ideas about how to do a better job the next time, or to change your behavior. Concreteness, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and then maybe we can come back to one of those shareholders, and something that we also see that is always successful stakeholders. Sorry, it's the management team leading by example.
Oh yeah,
is key in this part.
Yeah, if you expect people to gather and to give feedback, as a manager, you need to be the first one to lead by example and to give that feedback, and do that in the right way as well. And definitely also, I think it's expected, it's part of the job of a manager, but also if there is tooling to facilitate that, that you also show people that that's the way to do it, to actually use it and to give feedback to all the people that you report to them, report to you, or to incentivize the people that report to you to gather feedback, because there are some parts of the job that you can't evaluate. So I think, yes, there is a very important role for managers and senior managers to actually make that happen.
And for HR professionals too, even.
To be actually, let's say, the master or the organizer or the facilitator of the entire process, making sure that this works for employees, for managers, so that they can gather this and actually also give an idea on how we are doing on the people side of the business.
Okay, and I think that's a nice way to wrap it up for today. As a short reminder for you, the different steps that we discussed, they are all available in the ebook that we will send to you later on. So feel free to download it, have a look, and if you're in the situation where you're stuck in Excel sheets or on paper and you want to move towards take the next step in your performance management, if you feel that there is too much variety in the different teams on how performance management is done, or you want to move towards a more employee-centric solution for your performance management, feel free to reach out to us at Worx, and we will certainly love to have a discussion with you on how to approach it for the future. Thank you all for your time, for being here, and have a very pleasant day.
Next time.